You've just recreated the worst possible nightmare.
Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing.
You'd think with 2 mortgages out, the repo guy's staking out my car, my job on the line.
Even when we win, it's just a matter of time before we give it all back.
There are serious financial management problems.
Are we potentially at a point where we might actually lose the financial system as we know it?
And you're standing there and you suddenly realize, hey, I'm still here.
Don't be a victim of the current economic crisis. Turn the tables on the banksters, collection agencies, and other crooks. You can stress out trying to find a way to make the minimum payments every month, or you can get them to pay you. Join hosts Jesse and Dave every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time for What Lies in Your Debt, right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Where information never sleeps.
You need some more speed records in this day and age. You need coverage.
Coverage? Oh, you mean them little root weevils that crawl around popping off cameras in your face?
Those root weevils write history.
Many of you know that quote by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. Well, you can, and Event Horizons will give you those truths. So when you're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore from that memorable CNN network, you'll know just what to do. We will draw you in and become your news addiction at Event Horizons. Join us Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time at freedomslips.com. At Revolution Radio. Our world team members are Dennis Fetcho, John Ilias, David Dunger, Hyla Cass, MD, Melanie Bridgeton, Jim Mars, Paula Harris, John Trallo, Maria Payan, Christopher Husser, DODDS, Jonathan Orchard, and me, your anchor, Dr. Robin Falco.
If you decide not to volunteer, it will not be held against you in any way.
Sounds dangerous.
It is.
Very dangerous. Count me in.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another extra big-ass fries?
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
trouble.
Come
on. My kids are starving.
Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we believe in freedom of ideas, freedom of speech, but above all, we believe in freedom of existence through self-reliance. This station is 100% listener-supported, and as a fundraising promotion, I have a kick-ass free gift for a $100 donation. 35,000 seeds. 25 years in the freezer. Long-term storable, 54 different varieties. So if food prices go crazy, the shit hits the fan, or if you just want to save tons of money every year by creating your own food like I do, grab our seed pack special. Just look for the banner on the homepage at freedomslips.com. Don't be a statistic. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution. We need, as humans, to start taking care of ourselves and not depending on the megacorps to provide unhealthy, nasty food. Included in this package is also a DVD with 900 survival and off-grid living documents and the offline home canning how to do everything website all on the DVD. So when you're growing all that food, you know how to can it, store it, preserve it, etc. with all these documents. So thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I hope that you will pick up this package and start learning to be free. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps and freedom is one seed that needs to be planted.
What we do in life, it goes in eternity.
Hello, good evening, good day, everyone. I'm your host, Joe Kiernan. Welcome to R.O.A.M Radio, Researchers on a Mission Radio, here on freedomslips.com. I'd like to have everyone make their way, please, to the chat room. You'll find it, freedomslips.com. Go to the chat room, log in, pick out a nice name. Find a lot of good people in there having good, interesting conversations. And you could partake within the program this evening, and we could be interactive, and you could get a lot of questions into the guests. We also have Tim producing the show. Tim C., you here with us, buddy?
Yes, I am.
How are you tonight?
Very good. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. Doing good. As you know, Tim, we have Dr. Elizabeth Garner with us tonight. She is an author, and she wears many hats. And the focus of the conversation tonight will be in regards to the artist Albrecht Durer, the German artist who is the king, the genius of the Northern Renaissance. And as you know, Tim, history tells us a lot about Albrecht Durer. We know quite a bit about him. He's produced a great deal of work. He lived in the Nuremberg area. He was a master engraver, a master printmaker. Very skillful in all perspective of the arts, and his painting was really top notch. He made several trips to Venice. He made a nice, quite detailed diary, journal keeping on his trip to the Netherlands. And we know quite a bit about him. We know where he was born. We know his house. History tells us real clear he was a master, a genius, and he is the pride and joy of the Northern Renaissance, the pride and joy of Germany. He's a master of masters, I tell you. And with that said, I'd like to really get right to it and bring Dr. Elizabeth Garner in. Hello, Dr. Garner. Are you here with us?
Yes, I am, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for taking the time to join the program this evening. We're really glad to have you on here. Well, you know, you've done a lot of work, and as I was reading on, you've done quite a lot of research into Albrecht Durer, who he was, how his life was, the art he accomplished, the achievements, the notoriety, and you certainly learned a lot about the lifestyle of the day. Can you begin by telling us who is Albrecht Durer?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to contradict you immediately because...
well, you remember, I was saying as history has taught us.
Yes, as history has taught everybody. And history is absolutely, or the myth of Albrecht Durer is absolutely, totally false and wrong. And that is what I've been working on for the last 7 years of unraveling and coming up with the real truth of what was going on with Albrecht Durer and other people in his life. But first I'd like to tell you the absolutely, truly crazy way of how I got into this, because never in my entire life would I have ever expected to become an art collector, nor would I have expected to have tripped over anything that is of such monumental importance to art history, which I'd say basically blows the doors off of 500 years of art history ever in my lifetime. And it just started from this crazy, everything that's been attached to how I have been able to be in fortunate situations that were necessary to get me onto the next step have really been serendipitous and bizarre. It all started basically in 2002. My husband died, and he was Special Forces Vietnam veteran. He was buried in Arlington. And at that particular point in time, I became military issue and got all these veterans benefits. And I really didn't know what to do with myself at that particular point. There were a lot of other deaths in the family and things that I was handling. But since I'd always been a student, I decided that I was going to attempt to go back and pick up a dream of mine, which had been to become a scientist, which I had been steered off of very early in my early college career. So I was lucky enough that the local community college had a biotechnology degree, and I thought, this is going to be fabulous. Okay, I'm going to have a very good time. And so I signed up for biotechnology, and I was acing all the biology courses because I'm actually a scientist at heart and a nerd. And I relax by reading medical journals. I actually won a prize because of the fact that I was in law school because I was reading a Scientific American magazine. But anyway, so I'm going through biotechnology and I have to take chemistry, and that's when I hit the wall. I found myself spending more than 50 hours a week just trying to do the homework or even understand what the chemistry was about. And ultimately it was like, this is not going to happen. So I ended up having to go to my VA advisor, who turned out to be someone that I had gone to elementary school with. And she started laughing as soon as I walked into her office. And she said to me, well, you have to declare a major. And I said, what are you talking about? I thought I just got to take courses that would be fun. Like I was taking geology of Connecticut and other things that were fun things. And she says, no, you have to declare a major. And she says, I got a real problem with you. You've got so many degrees and you've got so many credits. I don't know what to do with you. So she took a look at the schedule that I had signed up for the next semester, and she saw drawing one, and she said, well, that's it. Why don't this is basically almost a verbatim conversation. She says, you don't have any art courses. Why don't you become an art student? And I said, okay, I'll become an art student. And she said, well, graphic arts or fine arts. And I said, fine, will do. And that's how I became an art student. So my absolute worst fault on the face of the earth is that I'm always late. Okay. I mean, I rest assured I'll be late for my own funeral. But anyway, so what had happened was the hands-on teacher that was handing out all the semester's work that we were supposed to copy of masters. I was late to the class. She had already given this whole speech about who the artist was. Of course, I missed it. Got there, gathered all the paperwork, and I literally thought it was of many different artists of the Renaissance period. But as it turned out, her favorite artist was Albrecht Durer. And everything that she had handed out was Albrecht Durer's drawings and masterpieces that we had to copy in different ways. So the way people learn, I mean, if you think about it, and I really wonder about how students are learning these days in the internet age, with their iPads and whatever they're doing. I mean, one of the things we know from brain chemistry is if you write something down or you copy it, then the brain, it imprints on the brain. And so for the entire semester, here I was copying Durer's work. I had no idea it was Durer. And the entire semester, Durer's technique and his very particular, stylistic ways of doing things were imprinting on my brain because of the fact that I was literally copying this and having to copy it in very in much detail that took a long period of time. I never knew that I was copying Albrecht Durer. What I found very strange, though, was all of a sudden unbeknownst to me, but I found myself every time Albrecht Durer's name was brought up, okay, my head would pop up. I mean, actually, I would be sitting in art history class, and I'd been in so many of those that I'd sit in the back of the room, and I'd bring a magazine and I'd stick it between the book. We all called it darkness at noon. All of a sudden that teacher got to Albrecht Durer, my head just flew up, and I started paying attention, but I didn't know why. I had absolutely no idea why I was being attracted to Durer, but it turns out it was because of the fact that I had been copying him for an entire semester. I actually, now that year, I started the biotechnology in 2003 and switched over to art in 2004. I call the date of the birth of my actual Durer collection March 5th, 2006. And in between, I, for different reasons and different signs, because I have a finance degree, I began to believe that the stock market was not going to be a good place to be. And, in hindsight, it turned out that I was correct. And had thought that perhaps moving into art might be a good way to at least maintain investment capital. So I had found this absolutely spectacular gallery called Spatewood Gallery that is run by Andrew Weiner and his wife Sonia Hansard Weiner in Upton, Mass. And if anybody happens to live in the Boston area, they should never pass by this particular gallery.
There you go.
It is the most beautiful gallery that I have ever seen. They purchased an old church. And, as soon as you walk in the door, the stained glass windows are all around you. And, the amount of artwork that is in there is just astounding.
Oh, that's great.
It ended up that I had called up Andy and I asked about Durer prints, and he said yes, he had some, and so I made an arrangement to go up and look at them. When I walked on the door, I felt like the biggest idiot on the face of the earth. That it was like, I am so over my head. I don't even know how to get out of here. Not only with my purse intact, but with my, what's the right word? My integrity intact, because I was obviously, in the presence of a very learned man.
Yeah.
So what occurred was I purchased my first Durer print from him, and there was this very strange kerfluffle that he was giving me a book as a present for the purchase, because it wasn't a cheap print, or it wasn't a cheap amount of money. And when I got home, he called me the next day. Well, actually, what had happened was I had picked up a $650 book, and I was walking out the door with it, and he was trying to rescue his $650 book. And of course, now I'm even more mortified. But he called me the next day and he said, I've been able to locate that book. If you'd like me to purchase it for you, I'd be happy to. I asked the price. He told me. I gulped, and I said, well, yeah, sure. And I thought about it, and this is a point I want to make to everybody about art, that I think is very critical. If you're spending more than $500 for any particular piece of art, that you happen to like, or you're buying for a gift for somebody, you should really know something about the artist. And I got home, and I can't really call it buyer's remorse, but I actually was telling myself, I am a total idiot. I'm an absolute total idiot that I would have spent this amount of money not knowing anything about the artist that had made this print. So I called Andy up, and he was a retired professor from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And I had the opportunity. He and his wife invited me to dinner. So I was in their living quarters, and I have to say, he had the absolute largest private library I have ever seen in my entire life. I was so completely stunned of original books and medieval books and so on and so forth. So I knew that was in the right place. So I called him up and I said, listen, would you mentor me? I really think that I need to start, learning about Albrecht Durer since I've spent this money. And of course, he was thrilled to be a mentor after being a retired professor. And he instructed me on all the books that I needed to buy and all the books that I needed to read. And so I bought them and I started reading them. And I'm the type of person that I will read the book from cover to cover, including all the footnotes. And through this entire process, 47 days after I had bought this print, I was at the Boston Print Fair and had the opportunity of buying Melancholia 1, which is Durer's most famous print, Small Jug Watermark, which was a very important reason about Small Jug Watermark and watermarks in general. And I called Andy up and I said, Andy, I'm at the Boston Print Show, Melancholia, here's the price. Do I buy this thing? And he said, first of all, do you like it? Or what do you find beautiful about it? I said, actually, I think it's the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. So he said, this is for real. And he said, well, why would you want to spend that kind of money on it? I said, well, isn't it a good investment? I mean, how often do you run into a Melancholia? And so he made me do a 25-minute dissertation to him. And I said, well, I've read this and I can believe this. And as it turns out, the first person who had actually offered an opinion that Melancholia was about Durer's mother was Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1819 in the Harvard Law Journal, and that got published. And I told him, well, Oliver Wendell Holmes isn't such a slug. I don't believe this one. I don't believe that one. Finally, Andy couldn't contain himself. He said, buy it. It's less than wholesale. So I went running back to the show. Some other woman had the picture in her hand in the frame, and I ripped it out of her hand and I said, go away, I'm buying it. So the print dealer was really taken aback. As it turned out, again, I was very fortunate, and this is another thing that if anybody's going to buy any art, that they really, especially when it comes to prints, that they really need to pay attention to is don't go and do it on your own. You need to find a print dealer who is very reputable, who you can see has a lot of books and can prove to you that they have a lot of knowledge about whatever artist you might be particularly interested in. And if they start talking to you about buying any particular print, as for investment purposes, run for your life. Okay, because that's what's happening today. But anyway,
I'm getting there's already a few questions coming into me. So there's people eager to find out questions directly, and I really wanted. Can you tell us something?
Let me just finish this whole point because this is the main gist of what I need to say about this.
Go ahead.
as I was inhaling and consuming all these catalog raisonnés and everything about what the experts were saying, okay, the two major things that I was noticing was expert A and expert B were in total disagreement with themselves, and I kept asking myself, why would that be? If the print is the print and it says what it says, then there shouldn't be this type of discrepancy. Sure. But even more important was the fact that I kept saying, what's wrong with all these pictures? Because what they were saying was not what I was seeing in the prints. I was seeing something completely different. And that's when I was saying, what's wrong with me, or what's wrong with these experts, or what's wrong with these prints?
Because for 500 years, the same story has been told. Correct.
Now, if we want to get the callers.
Well, you know what? Can you explain to everyone what is the Durer Cipher and the Durer Diary to help people understand on where we're going to be going here?
Okay. This is real. This is
as if it's a 2-sentence answer.
Yeah, right. Well, once I got to the point that I decided there was something wrong with the pictures because I was seeing something completely different, and I had no idea why. I needed to find out why I was seeing something completely different. Now, what is taught in all art history classes for the Renaissance, even at the top university levels, is for the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance iconography, which is basically a symbol language. Iconography is just the big word for the language of the symbols. And, all the art historians and all the researchers learn, it's all about the Italians. So what was happening was that all these experts were basically trying to stick a round peg into a square hole and were explaining all these exceptionally weird compositions via Italian Renaissance iconography. And of course, as I started getting into this, the first avenue that I went down was the occult and occult symbols and esoteric information, because that, to me, that would be anybody's first inclination to see, if that was a different message system that was being used. And I had to teach myself the entire, well, I can't say the entire, but, the much more than the basics of Italian Renaissance iconography, to be able to understand those symbols and how what I was seeing, didn't fit. And, going down this path actually kept me on this path for 2 years until it entirely broke down. Okay. And I want everybody to understand that this was never a linear type of finding. There would just be different things that would happen at different times that came in. For example, the purchase of Melancholia. Basically what I discovered is that Albrecht Durer made up his own language, symbol language system that he employed. And nobody had ever had the courage to go down that path, because in the academic world, you will be punished dramatically for fighting that battle. And I receive emails all the time from people all around the world, bravo for you. and you will be, you will be ignored and punished and so on and so forth. And, they are true. The academics are exceptionally angry about things that I am writing.
Oh, yes.
A lot of people are very angry about telling the truth.
Well, a certain story has been told for a very long time,
right?
And it fills nicely, and people really don't like change.
It fills their pockets nicely because everybody can trot out a Durer print. Any museum can takes a Durer print or a series of Durer prints, and they make up whatever they want as an exhibition. I mean, I've been writing recently about, I found all sorts of papers on the net where these academics have taken a Durer print completely out of context and used it completely in the wrong way. And, I write, this is how it works, and this is why it's so bad. The actual first symbol, because there are a number of ways that I could go. The two of which were heraldry and a thistle. Okay, and I picked the thistle first because Durer was known for his botanical accuracy. And there is a very particular thistle that shows up 4 times in Durer artwork, in one of his self-portraits and the portrait of what is now considered to be one of his sisters, and in 2 of his engravings. And I was finally able to let me backtrack. That symbol had been identified as sea holly, something called Eryngium maritimum. And in the Italian system, sea holly was considered an aphrodisiac. So therefore, the paintings had been interpreted about being about love. But when you look at the prints, you can see quite clearly that if there is any consistency to this, that he was definitely not indicating love by this thistle. And I finally found the picture that was the exact match. So I knew that that was the beginning of when I knew that I was on the right track, that what I was seeing was not false. And I began to hypothesize that there was a whole different symbol system that Durer had made up, and that was true. He was he was using Hungarian symbols that would not be recognizable. He was using symbols specifically about Nuremberg that would not be known outside of Nuremberg, because they were idiopathic or idiosyncratic to Nuremberg. And then
which is virtually, he's not only a master in all of these arts before mentioned in engraving, he's created his own language per se in the arts. When everyone and still today, we're so used to the Roman iconology that you're suggesting he went ahead and just created his own style altogether. That's truly genius.
Well, when you have to do this to save your life and the life of your family, okay, it becomes very critical to be an expert at this. What it turns out is, if anyone had caught the Durers, and I say the Durers, and I'll get into the fact that there is another hand in the artwork, and I'm not correcting you here, Joe, but I just want to make it clear that there are, besides the paintings, there are 4 types of prints, and there are some very major differences among them. The first one being woodblocks.
Thank you for mentioning these. Yeah, this is very, very crucial.
Which are the relief carved, okay, and they were made out of pear wood, and Durer. All of Nuremberg was very stratified. They didn't have guilds. They didn't allow guilds. What they had was called sworn crafts and free crafts. And as it turned out, because the publishing business and the printing business was so new, being an illustration became a free craft. And so there, and under that, Durer never cut a wood block. Okay, he wasn't allowed by law to cut a wood block. From a wood block, he would be the one that would, he or somebody else would be the one that would design what would go onto the wood block. It would be transferred onto the wood block, and then it would be handed over to what's called a Formschneider, a woodblock cutter, and that's who would cut the block. Then you get into the metal prints, which break down into three different, or the intaglio prints as they're called, which are the metal prints. And there are the engravings, there are the etchings, and there are the dry points. Now, there are 105 of these intaglio prints. He only made 6 etchings, which is a completely different technique, where the plate is covered by wax, and then you scrape away, and then you do your stuff. Engraving is actually taking a tool and digging a groove into the metal plate. And dry point is the hardest and most delicate of all, turning out not to be economically feasible because basically one could only get about 50 to 100 good prints off of a dry point plate. And, you know, I mean, he's selling in volumes. So he only made 3 dry points. They're very rare. I happen to own one of them, one of them.
Well, I know he did. What was it, Silver Point, when he had done the first self-portrait when he was 13?
Yeah, so Silver Point was, and that was a technique that required. I mean, it's called Silver Point because of the way that the ground is made out with silver in it, and one has to be exceptionally skilled to do a Silver Point drawing because you cannot erase any mistakes whatsoever. Whereas what people don't really understand in any way, shape, or form is the sophistication of these people during the Renaissance, and especially in Germany. Everybody's got the idea that everything was filthy and it was like the Dark Ages.
They were savages, is what history told me. You know, basically, It was a filthy, disgusting place to be and terrible time to be alive.
It wasn't, okay. They were making money hand over fist. Actually, every
printing press was brand new in town.
Excuse me?
The printing press was brand new in town in Nuremberg.
Actually, no. It was, well, okay.
Right? I'm telling you as history presents it.
Right. Gutenberg gets the credit for making a commercially viable printing press. Of course, he died broke. It actually turns out to be the Jews in 1444 who actually made the first commercially viable printing press, but they were doing that to print Hebrew books. But
you said that was in France, right?
The evidence of that is in a French library, yes.
Excellent.
Actually, what it turned out was that it was the goldsmiths who flipped into the publishing business, because you have to know how to use the goldsmithing tools,
And engravings, right?
and engravings. So that's how the transition happened. In 1470, Anton Koberger, who became Durer's godfather when Durer was born on May 21st, 1471, he was the largest publisher. Consider him Rupert Murdoch. He was the largest publisher in Germany. He actually had 24 presses and employed 100 men, which was astounding at the times. What nobody knows is that the second biggest publisher in Nuremberg turns out to be Durer's father-in-law, Hans Frey. And so when Durer gets back from Venice, or when he gets married, I mean, Durer, the custom was that the bridegroom moved in with the family of the bride. But as it turns out, Hans Frey owned two houses right, basically on Fifth Avenue. And so Durer walks into a fully equipped printmaking shop when he gets back. So he's all set up to go. But in furtherance of that, people also need to understand, and I get excoriated for even saying anything like this. Durer was not all that good. Okay, I mean, you can see he was sold off, okay, and reapprenticed by his father in 1486 to learn to be an illustrator for the publication of Anton Koberger's supposedly greatest audacious book, the Nuremberg Chronicles, which was which had 1,800 illustrations, and they just had a labor shortage. And what nobody is realizing also is that the Durers were very wealthy. Okay, the house that Albrecht the Elder was allowed to buy was there were really two main streets where the rich lived. So I mean, you don't get to move in next to Donald Trump.
And you said it right. The house he was allowed to buy.
Yeah. I mean, so it turns out Michael Vulgamut, who was the illustrator, was two doors down from the Durer house, and the author and the financiers all lived on this house, and all these other rich people, lived on the street. So Durer is a made artist, and the only real example that I can come up with, and I'm not sure the age of your listeners, but for anybody who is old enough to remember the Monkees and how the Monkees were, the TV show put together the Monkees, they were not musicians of any kind.
Right. I'm sure we have plenty of listeners in the age group who know the Monkees. They're before my time, but I know them well. I know these characters.
So Durer is forced to become an illustrator in 1486, and what happens at that particular point in time, Daddy gets not only a goldsmith shop, also on Fifth Avenue, for like a token $1 a year for rent. He's also given stock options with all the other rich people, often Hungary and Moravia and so on and so forth. So, the whole concept of Durer being this, poor boy made good because he was such a fantastic artist is just, baloney. He was a derived brand that was made on purpose, and he was well protected by the rich and famous of the area.
He was well promoted for the time.
And yes,
yeah.
And well, no,
right.
For the beginning, he was not well promoted. He was really just a local regional artist, okay, whose markets were Nuremberg, Frankfurt, Augsburg, and Regensburg. He doesn't get famous until after the apocalypse. When that goes worldwide, he literally becomes the Elvis of his day. Okay, he is the king. No matter what anybody else wants to say about how wonderful Leonardo and Michelangelo and Raphael and so on and so forth, by the time he gets back to Venice in 1506, they actually challenge him to a paint-off. He wins. The Pope declares that his work is so good, or one particular print was so good that it would cost 10,000 indulgences for anybody to even look upon it. And I have seen a perfect print of that particular print. It's called the Sidereum, held by two angels, and it's absolutely the most amazing print I have ever seen. But the bottom line of this whole thing is that Durer made up his own symbol language, and that's what he was using to encode his artwork. And what's even more amazing is that he was hiding this all in plain sight. Just like Sherlock Holmes and the Purloined Papers, if you want to hide something that's really important, you hide it in plain sight, and that's what he did. Now, again, as I said earlier, there were lots of things that zigzagged, and while I'm looking up the Thistle and while I'm still trying to find other things, about a year after I started this whole thing, Andy called me up and said he had a print that he wanted me to buy, which is known as the Promenade. And we had a long discussion, and I said, I don't think that this print, but this is not my concept of what this this collection is going to be. And Andy kept nagging me, and finally I said, you know what, Andy, everything that has surrounded what I have found out about Albrecht Durer and everything that has happened is so bizarre. Okay, I'll buy the print. I said, but I can't. It's coming from you. I'll buy the print. I don't know why, but I just don't know when I can get into, to inspect it. He said, no problems. But as it turns out, my uncle died relatively soon after that. And so I was able to get in there, and I went and inspected the print, and we had a discussion because I had to go so far afield about learning about so many different things. I inspected the print, and I said, yeah, it's in really good condition. And then I looked at him, I said, but I don't understand how Durer got away with selling this print, okay? Because the print is illegal. If you have to think about medieval people who are looking at images, okay? They have to get the message right off, okay? Or they go on to the next artist. There's so many of them around. And I said, anybody who's looking at this print is going to know that this is an illegal print because the woman is wearing an illegal dress, because Nuremberg had what were called sumptuary laws, and everybody was, if you think of the Kardashians or any of these reality shows, anything about fashion or anything, they don't hold a candle to what was going on in Nuremberg. So the Nurembergers passed these sumptuary laws, and they were so strict it even came down to how many pearls you could have on a christening gown. And so I'm talking with Annie. I'm saying, you look at the dress, it's an illegal dress. How does he get away with selling an illegal dress? Everybody, who looked at the print would know it's an illegal dress, and yet he doesn't get arrested. He's allowed to sell this print. Why is he not getting arrested? And then I said offhandedly, and this again is verbatim, and I said, and there's really something funky about the neckline that I cannot understand. And Andy, who is 6'4" and I'm 5'3", whips out his loop and he bends over and he inspects the neckline and he stands up and he says, well, there's a really lovely I and a lovely C in the neckline. And I tend to be a grabby person, so I grabbed the loop out of his hand and I looked and I stood up and I said, yeah, well, there's a word in this neckline and I know what the word means. And he was doing all he could do to remain composed. And that was my first real, the first real embedded micro engraved code that I found that was irrefutable and unmistakable. And I did know what the word meant. That was, then I knew I was on the right track. Because it then became my task to discover how the cipher worked, what were all the symbols and everything that made up this cipher, crack the cipher, and decode the messages. The hardest part was figuring out who the messages were for, and actually that I've only done in the last two months. And I've been working on this almost 24/7 since March 5th, 2006.
Well, it's quite amazing that you were able to just recognize it enough to know that there was a correlation and something being told in a very sneaky little way.
Oh, it's the sneakiest that anybody could ever imagine.
And it's so daring. You think with the penalties at hand, why even make the attempt? So it must have been of great importance. It's a big risk to take.
It's beyond of great importance. I mean, first of all, Durer never wanted to be what's known as a maler, a painter, as it was called. He wanted to be remembered as a famous mathematician, and he was an expert at optics and how the brain worked when viewing a two-dimensional artwork plane, plane, a flat plane that was representing a three-dimensional object. And again, Durer was a very rich, spoiled brat, protected by the government, and arrogant beyond Donald Trump. He just had better hair. Okay, but but this is important. This is really important. And then he became Frodo of the Lord of the Rings, because the Durer story is a hero story. And he tragically had to become a hero against his will and risk everything because of what the government was doing and requiring him to do, which he couldn't refuse, and survive without anyone catching on to what he was doing. So the epic Durer story, like the Lord of the Rings, is really the hero story, and it teaches us, all of us, how to endure against all odds when you think you're helpless and you have no weapons. Okay, I mean, to me, that's what I find one of the most stunning lessons of this entire situation is that, it's not just about somebody, who died 520 years ago. Oh, and isn't this interesting that he encoded all this information? I mean, if he's caught in any way, or I should say if they are caught in any way, which I'll get to shortly.
Okay.
Because of their elite status in society, the Nurembergers reserved, they had different levels of torture. And for those of the elite that they considered to be traitors, they kept what is known as the Iron Maiden hidden in the bowels of the Rathaus, which is the city hall. And so the Durers and the Durer family faced impalement, which is like the impalement in the Iron Maiden is the absolute worst torture you can think of, because it's designed to hit certain organs in the body and to miss certain organs in the body so that you just die in agonizing death for the longest period of time.
And Liz, we're going to have to take a break. We'll be back in just a few more moments with Dr. Elizabeth Garner. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few more minutes.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Welcome back to Researchers on a Mission Radio. I'm your host, Joe Kiernan, produced by Tim C., Big Tim Coughlin. How are you, Tim? You're hanging in there? Nice and quiet. Been a really nice, great producer of the whole show. We have Dr. Garner with us. Things have been amazing. Dr. Garner, I'm sorry to cut you off when the commercials came in.
It's okay. I'll go on for days, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I wanted you to. But we had to take the station identification. And with that said, can we pick right back up there, because we got an hour left, and there's so much that people have to get from this that I'd really like to get into it.
And I want to. There are some very key points, and then I want to tell everybody about the movie we're making. So
that's up. That's what's up. Yep, I'm with you.
One thing that was most important was I believe in playing to strengths as opposed to weaknesses, and I had some very special skills and experiences that have occurred throughout my life that I decided that's what I needed to use to be able to approach cracking the cipher. And I had to make the conscious choice that I couldn't care where the whole story ended up. No biases, no assumptions. Whereas people in academia, can suffer severe consequences for bucking, rocking the boat. Okay. And my approach was, could I find some consistently used methodology that didn't require having to resort to torturous mythological associations and exceptionally arcane explanations, by hypotheses at every step of the way? Had it passed the reasonability test? Would a reasonable person come to the same conclusions when shown the true evidence? Okay, so because of all my experiences and the different industries that I've worked in, I have a degree in finance and almost finished master's in psychology, almost finished my art degree, a law degree. I was married to a painter, worked in banking, manufacturing, nuclear, insurance, healthcare space, and pharmaceuticals. And it turns out all these experiences were extremely important to cracking this code. From a personal standpoint, I think one of my greatest talents is pattern recognition, and that comes from having spent 27 years as an international computer consultant. Again, I was a voracious reader. I read the entire encyclopedia at age 6. My mother took me to museums, and I have an almost photographic memory. So that
helps with recognition all day long.
Well, I mean, for example, what happened in Nuremberg, while I was looking at paintings of Michael Vulgamut, Durer's master, in the Frauenkirch, as I studied the painting, it was the eureka moment for solving the print Durer, erroneously known as Night, Death, and the Devil. It was like, oh, wait a minute, that's what I've been looking for. And that's what it means. Okay, so I mean, by this time I had every symbol, memorized in my brain. But I decided the only intelligent thing to do was to follow the money trail, because that's where my background lied. Why was Durer making which artworks when, and how was he not getting arrested for publishing a lot of these prints? Durer died among the top wealthiest men in Nuremberg. Art historians and researchers never look at the money trail, but it's always about the money. It's always about the money.
Always follow the money.
Okay, so...
Another correlation to just how it is the same today.
Oh, everything that was
Right?
happening back then is the same today. Okay, it is uncanny, absolutely, totally uncanny, of the similarities between what was happening back then and what is happening today. I did get interrupted at the point that everybody thinks, everybody in medieval life was dirty, but actually in Nuremberg, all workers were required to be given bathing money, and we were required to go to the baths at least once a week. And that whole bathing ritual could take anywhere between 3 and 5 hours, and that's where dentistry was going on, and their hair got cut, and they were doing sauna and so on and so forth. Nuremberg actually was one of the most cleanest cities. I mean, even in comparison today. So this whole idea, and I know everybody wants to see filthy, dirty, sloppy mud, but it just wasn't. It wasn't that way. So anyway, next.
Well, it really is. I mean, you just had me thinking about it. It's even when we had earlier discussed with the Eimhoffs being the shippers. It's just so interesting how they were just able to just ship things from place to place, just go from here to there. Travel was kind of the same, just a little slower. And
that's not true at all. Okay, they couldn't go from point A to point B. They could only travel along certain routes. All were toll routes. They were all under different controls of different bishoprics.
Lots of tolls.
You had to get travel documents. It had to be planned out in detail. Durer used the Imhoffs. The Imhoffs were the people who were in charge of transporting everything. Mm-hmm. And everything was transported in barrels. I mean, people think, if you went and you bought a book, for example, back then, that's not how it happened at all. The books were printed single leaf, and then you took it to a bookbinder, and they would bind it according to your specifications. You would get your book plates made up and put into it. But everything was shipped loose leaf. And everything was, even if it was a book like The Small Passion, which consists of 37 pages, those would be unbound, and then the person had to go get the book made up.
I didn't even know so much went into it. We're so used to it just being a one-stop shop. But it really was. It was a process.
They were using. Kohlberger was using just-in-time manufacturing. It's amazing that we think that we made all this stuff up, and they were so far more sophisticated. Other than from, of course, the technological revolution of the internet and
That's
robotics.
True. Very true.
But the printing press was the first internet.
In a major way, and boy, did they run with it.
Oh,
they were printing left and right, and
well, the reason why was the three things that were of the most danger in any city was war, fire, and siege. And they had this very complicated timekeeping system, which if anybody wants to go on my website and read the article, What Time Is It? I explain it in depth of how they had summer hours and winter hours. And of course, winter hours are always the worst because they had to figure out how to keep winter hours only consisted of seven hours of the day. So, work day. So everybody was getting drunk and everybody was partying, and they had a lot of police stuff that was necessary. And it was a very, very organized situation, as were the medieval fairs. The logistics of just running 3 medieval fairs where, most of the money was made is just amazing.
But we don't recognize, we think Renaissance fairs, where it's just a throne festival in an area, but they had a lot of planning to do. It was held in major cities, major city areas, and they took an account for a lot of people coming into town, right? They showed a lot of planning went into these events.
Actually, I found an article written by an MIT math student who analyzed this entire process. Each medieval fair in each city took 3 weeks. The first week was set up and organizing lodging and logistics of feeding, and sanitation and so on and so forth, and setting up the vendor stalls. And that was a very complicated process because they had to figure out how to keep they had to organize it so that the buyers could get around as fast as possible and spend as much money as possible, but not have similar vendors too close to each other. So there was just so much work that went into it. The second week was buying, and the third week was the financial settlement of the settling of the accounts and cleaning up the garbage and so on and so forth. So it just was... it's an astonishing example of logistics that was implemented everywhere for these medieval fairs. And it's funny because the current print fairs run along the cycles of when they ran in Nuremberg, so on and so forth.
It's strange. Still carrying today. Well, how did you come about knowing that the family chronicles were in fact factual?
Well, okay.
Well, I mean, they're
now
you came up that they are fake, right?
The most important thing of all of how I cracked this. The Germans write down everything. I mean, literally, the Germans write down anything, absolutely everything. The Nuremberg City Archives has 39,000 feet of shelving concerning everything written about Nuremberg since the year 1000 AD, which is when they believe that the city was founded. And yet Albrecht Durer, their most famous son, is a ghost among these archives. There is almost nothing authentic in Durer's handwriting that exists. And what researchers relied upon were 3 major documents. One, a supposed autobiography that is known as the Family Chronicle. 10 letters that Durer wrote to Willibald Perkamer from Venice in 1506 to 1507. That were only found secreted in the walls of the Perkamer mansion during renovations for a wedding in the 1700s. So, Willibald Perkamer becomes a very suspect person of why he's walling up these letters from Durer to begin with. And then there is the Diary of the Netherlands Journey from 1519 to 1521. Which accounts for the 2 years when he went to get his pension back after the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian died in January 1519. So this is what everyone has relied on to build this monolithic myth about Albrecht Durer, which is totally false. The only other, well, first of all, the only thing that's authentic out of those three major documents are the 10 letters that had been hidden in the walls. Then there is one page of his private diary known as the Gaden book, the Buch, that survived. And this private diary page is bizarre beyond belief. It is not numbered. It is lettered at the top with a letter G. And he came back to this page and he recorded the deaths of his father and his mother, which occurred 12 years apart. Now, who goes back to a diary page and does anything like this?
That's right.
Okay, I mean, it's just bizarre. And then the question became, why did this page survive and no others? I mean, I know why. Other than that, there exists some tax receipts, some bad poetry he printed, and notations he made either on paintings or on drawings.
Really not that much at all. In his own hand.
I mean, the only thing that we can actually say is authentic is the one diary page, the 10 letters from Venice.
Right.
And that's actually it, because even the diary of the Netherlands journey that exists is a copy. And there are 2 days that are missing. I mean, Durer, I have the translation, and there are 2 days in this diary that are missing at the beginning of this entire 2-year chronicle of his trip, which brings up a question, but that's not in his handwriting. And the Family Chronicle, which is supposedly this autobiography, 5 copies exist, all of which differ from each other, and these documents didn't surface until about 100 years after his death. Most of the information contained therein was public record and could have been written by anyone, and basically was, except for a couple of some, really nonsensical paragraphs about how he went and begged his father, "Oh, I want to be an artist. I want to be an artist." I mean, that just never could have happened in that society. It never could have. It didn't. I mean, he was purposely reapprenticed to Vogelmitz specifically for making the Nuremberg, to become an illustrator, to make the Nuremberg Chronicles. So the whole monolithic myth of Durer is made up. But I will tell you that the Netherlands Journey Diary is a treasure map for all you treasure hunters out there. It is a true treasure map, and you should probably buy yourself a copy of it and read it. It's parts of it are really funny because people were giving Durer parrots, and Durer was dragging parrots around with him for 2 years on this trip, but he ultimately moved his headquarters to Antwerp.
At times, that journal can be quite boring, but there are interesting things that pop up in there. I mean, that's where he had the opportunity to see some of the Mayan gold that had returned from the Americas, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
But I happened to find, what was more interesting was, what was he getting paid for the prints? What was he giving for tips?
And all the tolls the man had to pay, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
In all different kinds of coinage. I didn't even know we had so many different coins back then.
I have a book called The Renaissance Print, which is an absolutely fabulous book by Parshall and Landau. That actually lists all the different types of monies that were used in the conversion tables and so on and so forth. I mean, basically, while he's in Antwerp, people, you can't consider that the artwork was sold because of its complexity or its fame or the compositional elements. The artwork was sold according to paper size, and also the substrate. So, for example, on the average, a woodblock print was selling for a quarter gulden, and engraving because it took longer and actually had the artist who was using the equipment to make the grooves into the metal plate, sold for half a gulden. He was selling, books. He makes some comment that he gives everything to the Regent Margaret, which is equivalent to 8 gulden, and he's giving tips to porters of 2 stivers, which basically could have bought a rabbit coat. So in one way, he was changing his prices depending upon what he thought the market would bear, so on and so forth. But let's get back to the Chronicle.
Yeah, because when you were mentioning the Chronicles, you had gotten into it pretty deep, and then with the addition of the publication of the records of the bell-ringing death registries.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity of being Yale Galleries of Art, quote-unquote Durer cataloger. Their print department had been shut down for 5 years for renovations. And it was a volunteer job, and I talked my way into it. And while I was working at Yale, I was able to get a copy. Nuremberg publishes a yearly publication about different things about Nuremberg. And in 1971, it was the 500th year birthday of Durer. And so they dedicated their whole Nuremberg Verschungen of 1971 to Durer's 500th birthday. And Yale did have a copy of the book. I had to wait for weeks for them to find it in the stacks because it had gotten lost. And when I got it and I realized the import of the things that I was seeing in the book, I basically copied the whole book. And then I translated it all. But in addition, the key clue was that Nuremberg also, for this birthday party, published what is actually translated as the bell-ringing death registries for the 2 main parish churches, St. Sebald and St. Lorenz, for the years 1437 and 1517 in 1971. Now, you have to understand that these death registries do not include everybody's death that occurred. It only included for people, somebody paid for the tolls to be belled about their death, okay, for whom the bell tolls. And in there, in one of the articles that this researcher, G. Hirschman, had been talking about what is family, and had extended the entire idea of the Durer family to godparents and godchildren and in-laws and so on and so forth. And so he did a very complicated family tree. And there was a teensy footnote symbol next to the name of Margaret Durer, who was the 8th child of 18. She was a twin, and according to the Family Chronicles, she died in childbirth and was not assigned a godmother. So in essence, she was completely erased from history, making her untraceable. But what caught my eye was that this Hirschman had a notation that there was a Margaret Durer that was buried at the St. Lorenz Church. And stupidly, I hadn't realized that a friend of mine had sent me this same information, which I'd been using as a desk cover. And I had been staring at this information for 2 years before the light bulb went off. So when
Of course, right there under your
it
nose.
was right under my nose. And when I looked at it, I said, I got to be the biggest jerk on the face of the earth.
Well, that's where he hit it, right? He hit it right in front of everyone, right under their nose.
Right.
It's right there.
And the footnote, the question mark was asking, could this have been the Durer sibling Margaret who died at birth? It was at that point that there was some planning that was involved, of course, but I jumped on an airplane. I had to get to Nuremberg. I had to see the death registries to see how they actually were written down, and the people at the Stadt Archives, the city archives, were very kind. It took a long time to locate the information, but after seeing how the entries were for the father and the mother and this Margaret Durer, I just ran to an antique bookseller that I had bought something from before, and said I absolutely had to have a copy of these Nuremberg death registries. And it turned out he said there was one last copy in print. I said, I don't care what it costs, I'm buying it, mail it to me. Here's, throw him the credit card. And that was that. So when they arrived, I spent 5 months of cross-referencing the death registries, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing what the dead will tell us. Again, these Germans were so detailed in what they wrote down, occupations, and...
Now, I know you found some feature in there that history tells me something different, and it's incredible you even found this related to the Durer family.
Well, the important questions that I had to answer once I had the death registries, and I don't exactly know what you're talking about, but you'll tell me.
Child number 8.
Well, yes. The 3 questions that I had to be able to prove or disprove was, first of all, was there another Durer family in town that this Margaret Durer could have belonged to? That's why I had to have the copies of the registries to be able to go through everything. And it turned out, no, the Albrecht Durer family was the only Durer family that was in town. Second of all, it became, okay, the way that German feminizes a woman's name is by adding an IN or an INNEN to the end of her name, which is why she's known as Margaret Durer. I had to determine, could she have been the wife of one of the 10 Durer boys, or could she have been a daughter of one of these unions, or any other type of relative within the Durer family? And the answer to that was no. Mm-hmm. That meant that she could have only been the original child number 8, a twin. She was born second, the first being Agnes the First, who died in childhood. And if what I call the fake family chronicle now was correct on their actual birth date, which would have been 1476, January 20th, 1476, making these 2 twins a Capricorn, which was very likely because, again, this was public information. She was 38 when she died, within weeks of her mother. And that's where we get to the artwork, because almost the rest of the story about Margaret Durer is told to us in the artwork. And the artwork tells us that she had a crippled foot, and of some kind. Her foot is backwards, which is why there's a lot of backwards things in Durer's art. And I'm getting to that most important part.
Yeah.
But because she had this crippled foot, she could not be married off. She could not be sent to a nunnery. She would have lived her entire life in her father's household, and then in Albrecht's household when the father died, and she and the mother became too poor to keep up the father's household. So she moved in. They both moved in with Albrecht and Agnes and the apprentices and so on and so forth. I think when I counted it up, there were 11 people that he was supporting at one particular point in time. Yeah. She would have been the person responsible for the spinning, which was, spinster. That was an incredibly important job. And she also would have been trained as a goldsmith like her mother, because the mother's death entry is, and this is very odd for the forename of the woman to have been maintained, but Barbara Duren's, the mother's entry says Barbara, and then it says Albrecht Durer, okay, which is how she would have been known as Albrecht Durer's wife, and then comma, it says Goldschmidt, meaning goldsmith. So we know for a fact that the mother was a goldsmith, and it was very common for the wives. It was very common for everybody who was married in whatever craft that they were to be working along with their spouse. There were many female woodblock cutters, beer makers, so on and so forth.
Was the shop also in the house as well?
Yes.
Okay, so they would have been immediately right there either way, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, the interesting thing is when he married Agnes Frey, he was given 200 guilders as a dowry, which everybody thought was just way too cheap, because Hans Frey had gotten 800 guilders when he married the mother, Anna Rommel. And that was to buy a house, but he never bought a house. He gets married in 1494. He never bought a house until 1509. And that's because he coveted the house owned by Bernhard Walter, who was a famous astronomer and actually built the second observatory in all of Europe. And so when Walter died, Albrecht immediatody buys the Walter house, and that is what is the Albrecht Durer house today when everybody goes, on a tourist situation. That's what it is. But anyway, let's get back to Margaret, because she is the most important.
Right, Margaret, the one you erased from history.
The one that I am resurrecting.
Yes, you are.
Okay, I tell everybody I'm in the resurrection business.
Well, it's just shame such a beautiful mind has been hidden, but it's a treasure that you're reviving it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. But once I knew that Margaret had lived, the cipher really began unraveling. For Margaret was the co-artist. And it was only knowing that she was alive that the symbol system and the messages that were being given started to make sense objectively. Because they were being given by two people. And that's what was really confusing, because in a number of prints, I call them Al and Margaret. Al was giving message A, but Margaret was giving message B. And it was a daring hypothesis to make that there were actually two hands in any of Durer's work. I mean, as once I hypothesized this and I started looking at the prints, it became so obvious to me. It's like, oh, well, yeah, there's his hand and there's her hand. And, I mean, for me, it's really easy to see who is doing what. And that paid off. And so we get to what I call the Durer diary. there are 9 levels of secrets that are embedded in the Durer diary, and the Durer diary is what I just have given as a generic name to all the encoded prints. But since I've made, it's actually quite crazy. I've discovered just since July there were 45 different artworks that I had missed that were encoded, and actually even tonight I was trying to keep my heart be still because I have what are called Durer sleuths, and anybody can be a Durer sleuth if you're interested in finding more of the clues that are in the Durer Cipher and the Durer diary prints. And it has come up to the point that at least half of all his artwork is encoded.
Incredible.
Tonight, while I was preparing for the show, there is a Durer sleuth who is a wonderful woman who was asking me questions about certain things, and I said, listen, here's what this is, but can you leave me alone for tonight because I'm trying to prepare for this radio show. I said, unless you can crack the code in this particular painting. And the next thing I get back from her is, oh, you make it so hard for me. Yes, I can crack the code, and here's what it means. And it's like my mouth dropped open, and I've been sitting here, just with. I mean, she's absolutely right. It's astonishing what the coding is, and it's not astonishing to me what it means. I mean, it's exactly what it should mean.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I mean, I've been looking for this for 7 years.
Right. Eureka.
So, that's another thing for all your listeners to know. I'll get to it later. I can't see everything.
All the clues.
I want to get to the next most important thing. What revealed itself from the all of this is that none of the encoded artwork stands alone, and none of it can be interpreted in isolation. There are interrelationships between prints and paintings, and one has to know which artworks, including the paintings, are interrelated with which ones and why they're interrelated. Thus, one has to start at the beginning of the encoded work, and actually the first print that can be definitively proved was encoded was in 1492. But for example, Melancholia 1, which is the most written about artwork in history, cannot be understood without the 1514 St. Jerome and the study. And it is only when the messages of these two prints are put together, okay, that the whole message is revealed. And it's not what anyone has ever thought. There is no melancholy in Melancholia. It is not an allegory to depression. And in fact, it is not an allegory at all. Neither is the 1514 St. Jerome in the study. And in fact, none of Durer's artworks are allegorical at all. Any other questions before I get to the movie?
Well, I was kind of hoping we would get to that movie right now.
Okay. For anyone who wants to contact me, now I'm assuming that you have my website shown.
Website's been posted. It will be continue posted. It'll be on all the websites as well, and will continue to be.
Okay. I've been writing articles for an art e-zine in the UK for a year, revealing secrets, but I'm revealing even more secrets on my own website. I have published a book on Amazon that gives the background of the economic conspiracy of the Nuremberg City Council to take over the world. which is what they were trying to do, which is titled Crimes in the Art, The Secret Cipher of Albrecht Durer, Secrets Hidden in Plain Sight. And I'm assuming you also have that posted for people to see what that...
That is true.
Okay. And now I want to tell you about this monumental film, okay, which is being written by the famous Daniel O'Doul, who is just this incredible script writer. And I will now tell you, I will read to you what the movie will be about. We have the working title at this particular point is known as The Cipher of the Savior. But you have absolutely no idea. Nobody has any idea of who the Savior is. And you won't till the end of the movie. And maybe not even then. But The Cipher of the Savior promises to be the most talked about film ever made about great art. And it's brilliant, driven, haunted, and even perverse master artisan. Now, here's the ingenious premise of The Cipher of the Savior. Imagine that Albrecht Durer has never died, never aged, never changed, and is alive and thriving in the current millennium. He has the same goals, the same methods, the same cross to bear, the same difficult mission, the same sister, the same sex drive, and the same vital secret mission. There is intrigue generated by his new mortal enemies. Or are they the very same nemesis who chased him all through those centuries ago? This Durer is the identical master illustrator that he was in the 15th and 16th centuries. But is he plagued by the same self-doubt, demons, and reliance on the special assistant necessary for him to excel? The answer to these questions is a resounding yes. And then we add into the mix the thrilling action sequences a la James Bond, sex, sophisticated plot twists, and bizarre and unexpected humor, homage to great B-movie icons such as Ed Woods, Russ Myers, and Roger Corman, all to cook up a gonzo gumbo fit for the lascivious, outsized, and unquenchable appetite of Albrecht Durer himself. The pre-production buzz about The Cipher of the Savior, soon to be previewing as the Kickstarter project of the year, may be likened to a mega hive full of killer bees, all straining to exit the orifice all at once. Cipher of the Savior will finally put Albrecht Durer back to where he belongs in the hearts and minds of every serious art aficionado.
Sounds incredible. Absolutely.
The script is absolutely incredible.
It does.
I am flabbergasted at O'Doul's capability of putting this masterpiece together. I am shocked at every scene that I read. And basically within the first 3 minutes or less, I mean, everybody will be riveted to this particular thing. One has to understand that what was actually going on was that Durer was truly the first real James Bond. He was having to play this extraordinary double cross and triple cross life in order to survive, which he encodes in The Prince. And
must have been very difficult to carry that burden so long. Frustrating.
I don't think so.
No, you think he was all right with it?
Well, the Italians were all trying to poison him. But he the guy has an ego that is boundless, absolutely, totally boundless. Now, the other thing special to know about the Cipher, And the diary, as I said, I'm contacted all the time by people who find new codes, like I just described. Somebody cracked one tonight. And actually, Joe cracked one yesterday.
Which Joe? This Joe?
Yes, that's you, Joe.
Oh, thank you.
And they're usually correct about there being new additional symbols. This always happens at art exhibitions. And when I publish new articles revealing secrets, it's absolute folly to think that one person such as myself could find everything, especially since I have an almost totally blind, nearsighted left eye. I just can't see. People will send me stuff and they go, look here, it's there. And it's like, I can't see it.
And there's a lot of bodies of work. There was a lot of work produced. And a lot of lines, a lot of tiny little lines hidden about. Incredible stuff.
Yeah, there's even more than that. And again, what I have learned is that he hid a lot of the codes under heavy ink.
Okay.
So it became advantageous in some circumstances to buy prints that were not considered to be, top-notch, super duper expensive prints, because it was only with the ink being worn away that I was able to find some of these codes. I'm in the process, as I said, I've published one book on Amazon. I'm in the process of writing the Encyclopedia of the Durer Cipher, which will explain all about how the cipher works, identifies all the currently known encoded prints and the messages that are given. And I'm looking for a proper publisher right now. So if there's anybody who's listening, please contact me.
Please contact her so we could get this in print so I could read it, please.
Please. Oh, it's beyond fascinating.
Elizabeth, our producer here, Tim, he had a question for you. If you have a moment in regards to the artwork.
One more thing, and then I'll take questions, okay? Because I can skip this other stuff. The other really interesting thing is the legitimate line of the 18 Durer siblings and his wife's family, Agnes and Catherine, all were extinguished by Durer's death. None of these 18 children had children that lived, that reproduced. And the same thing happened with the wives. However, the artworks tell us that Albrecht and Margaret had 2 bastard children apiece. Now, the artwork also tells us that one of Albrecht's bastard died by 1514. So that leaves 3 bastards that could have survived. And in other words, any one of you out there could be a real living descendant of Albrecht or Margaret Durer. And I do believe that these descendants exist today. And that they are out there and can be found through DNA testing, which is another whole treasure hunt and great fodder for documentaries in the future.
So not only there were illegitimate children, but you really think there's a strong possibility this line exists today? That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
An extremely high probability that that a real Durer descendant can be found, especially with when Durer died, a lock of his hair was cut off and is preserved in a German museum. Now I've been told you cannot extract DNA from keratin, but I bet you. Things have progressed. But there's other ways that it could be done. And I do strongly, I very, very, very strongly believe that Durer descendants exist and are walking the face of the earth today.
Wow. They wouldn't even know it, but there's, as we know, possibly 2 geniuses in that gene pool.
Well, it'd be really cool. And yes, I mean, Margaret should become the most famous woman artist of all time. As I say it, I mean, the most famous picture is Mona Lisa. And, I say Mona Lisa sat. What did Mona Lisa do? She sat.
Yeah.
Okay, but Margaret was doing the work.
and amazing work at that. Amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Especially when she's giving messages that are at cross purposes to what her brother is saying. So,
incredible.
It's
the battle of the geniuses inside the same studio.
All having to live, to survive, without anybody catching them.
For 500 years.
More than that.
I mean, that is an incredible chunk of time. But we do have a couple more minutes, and I really honestly wish this was like part one of a 4-part show, to be honest with you.
No, you can always invite me back, but anyway.
Well, you do have an open invitation, and I hope you know that, because you really are doing amazing work that is covering researching in so many levels, so many areas. It's changing the story of art, women, nations, histories, and it's a pretty darn cool story to boot.
It's I'll take any questions if you have.
Yeah, well, we got one right here, top and center. Tim, the producer, he's been chomping at the bit, and rightfully so. I've been getting questions sent in the whole time, and great response. So go ahead, Tim. What do you got?
Well, I first came across Durer's art, probably 20 years ago when I first started looking into the occult and whatnot. And it's like you said earlier in the show that when you look at a lot of his prints, you really do find allegory. But what you're saying is that it truly isn't allegory. But
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Tim.
You are?
Yeah, you find what?
Now?
Try it again.
Tim, we hear you here, but it might be because we had a caller just come in here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Excuse me?
Yeah, better.
I didn't hear you, sure.
Okay,
Keep
well,
going.
so basically what I wanted to know is regarding his self-portrait, the famous self-portrait.
You mean of
what's your take
1500?
on that? Right, the one where he's looking directly at himself, basically painting himself.
First of all, it was illegal to do that. Okay, that particular position was only reserved for Christ.
That's the full front image, right?
That's exactly. Was it him being an egomaniac like you described him before?
Oh, absolutely.
Was he trying to say something else? Because
yes, all of that.
All of the above.
That portrait would have been kept at home and probably hidden behind closed doors and only shown to very special customers to prove his skill, because it's so scandalous and so illegal for him to have represented himself full frontally, which was basically against the law.
Big time. But Ms. Garner, we also have a caller here joining us. Hello, caller. Are you here with us?
Yeah, this is Danny O'Doul.
Hello, Mr. O'Doul. How are you?
How are you, Joe Curtin?
I'm doing very well.
Hello,
it's an absolute pleasure having you calling into the show. I've heard a lot of good stuff coming from your way. Thank you so much for your contributions.
Show is a delight. You won a heck of a great interviewer, and you really know your stuff, and you really are the first to learn, and I'm excited to have participated for the last 2 hours. So quite good.
Thank you so much.
Quite good.
Thank you very much. And I hear you've been quite busy working with Ms. Garner.
Yes, we've been working for quite a while on this, and the Durer story is so dynamic, and as Dr. Garner was telling everyone, it's a fascinating industry in itself, because he was an industry in himself. And when you look at the printing press and you look at today's internet, you see such great parallels that it's such a contemporary story. It lives on, and the fact that he's such an icon and he's memorable and almost instantaneously recognizable to anybody who's somewhat well versed in art is just it just makes it such a current topic that it's that what Dr. Garner's been able to glean here and to come up with and discover is truly remarkable, and it's truly something that's going to be revolutionary. And the more that this information is allowed to disseminate, and disseminate not only in a scholarly way, but in a cinematic way or cultural way, and stories, journalists cover the book, the movie, what have you, it's going to do exactly what Dr. Garner is predicting, and it's going to reverse what are we talking about? 6 centuries of misinformation and myth-making that's just totally historically wrong.
Well, you hit it right on the head. She's peeled back so many layers, each one more interesting than